And imagine you're a country and basically another country can dictate your monetary policy for you. That's kind of the world we live in. And what Bitcoin comes around and does and says, here's an alternative. It's new, it's volatile, it's poorly understood, but it doesn't change its monetary policy based on the decision of a handful of people in a room. The Fed is basically a council of elders that sits around and determines the price of money, right? And Bitcoin doesn't have that. It's an open network. Bitcoin is becoming a top 5 or, probably top 5, definitely top 10 globally saleable money, which means that if you have Bitcoin, especially in urban centers of the world, reasonably tech-savvy areas, you can find someone to take Bitcoin off your hands a lot easier than you can for many other fiat currencies of the world.
One of the many arguments for Bitcoin and other top cryptocurrencies is their increasing popularity in the global marketplace. Unlike many fiat currencies, Bitcoin can be used in many countries worldwide, even in certain remote regions. With the exception of the US dollar, only a few other currencies enjoy the same flexibility that Bitcoin already does in its 13 short years. This is despite the fact that Bitcoin and the overall cryptocurrency market do not have the backing of a central bank like the US Federal Reserve. As a result of this and its many other qualities, popular macro analyst and Bitcoin advocate Lyn Alden believes the crypto asset is easily one of the top 5 currencies in the world. In a recent Fireside chat with YouTuber and author Preston Pysh, Alden discusses some of the most important qualities of Bitcoin for nation-states and retail investors. The popular macro analyst explains that Bitcoin is the only viable solution to the increasing dependence on the US dollar. The US dollar is the world's most dominant reserve currency, a status it has enjoyed since the Second World War. This means that the economic policies of the US Federal Reserve greatly impact other economies, especially developing economies with weaker currencies and greater dependence on the USD. In her interview, Alden explains that Bitcoin can level the playing field and give these struggling economies a fighting chance to develop at a much faster pace. Before we listen to Lyn Alden's powerful talking points on the importance of Bitcoin in the global economy, please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Thanks, and enjoy the video.
When we think of Bitcoin, we also think of it in a developed market perspective. We think of it as a United States person. We think of it as a European, for example. And people are like, why do you need Bitcoin? What is Bitcoin useful for? Whereas when you go to Argentina or Nigeria or dozens of other countries in the world, it's far more obvious why people need Bitcoin and why they might be interested in it, and why they might be interested in things like stable coins or things like ways to get US dollars, basically various types of harder money than whatever their local money is. And when the dollar gets super strong like it is now, the Fed is increasing interest rates, they're doing quantitative tightening, and they're trying to rein in inflation. And the problem is that there are so many countries in the world that buy commodities in dollars, right? So they're having a much harder time buying commodities. And then a lot of them have dollar financing. They have dollar-denominated debts from European lenders, from American lenders, from Japanese lenders, from Chinese lenders. These just dozens and dozens of countries in the world get squeezed when we do this. And so right now, kind of for lack of a better alternative, all the countries in the world, and especially the periphery countries, are tied into the dollar system. And so they're at the whims of the Fed. They can loosen dollars, and that usually what happens is these countries go out and they take on a lot more dollar-denominated debt, but then that comes back to bite them when the Fed can then arbitrarily at any time increase interest rates, strengthen the dollar, and it's like all of your liabilities are being hardened. And so what Bitcoin comes around and does and says, here's an alternative, and here's something that's worth exploring.
You've said to me the importance that you think it is that this is a grassroots movement. Share some of your thoughts on that and why you think it's so profound.
So I think most people here have heard of Bitcoin Beach, right? So that what was it, 2019 when they started, and they build this bottom-up community in El Salvador, and it's a small circular Bitcoin economy where a large percentage of the population is educated on it, they understand it, the Bitcoins are locally held, and there's been a lot of focus on nation-state adoption. And I think that's healthy. I mean, it's obviously a big sign of ongoing structural adoption when nation-states adopt Bitcoin. But of course, you can't impose education from top down. You can't impose buy-in from top down. And when we look at politics in general, grassroots movements are always more powerful than like who has the most money for financing, for example. If the candidate's not right, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it. And it's kind of the similar thing. If people don't understand Bitcoin, it doesn't matter if the government mandates it or not, or mandates its legal tender. And so I think nation states can do a lot by making it, not a taxable currency, but I think that actual adoption has to come up from these much smaller communities. And one thing we've been seeing over the past year or two, especially the past year, is that they've kind of replicated the Bitcoin Beach model, where you have Bitcoin Lake, you have Bitcoin Island, you have Bitcoin Jungle, right? There's little communities popping up in Costa Rica, Guatemala, Vietnam, Isle of Man. There's basically all these different little communities popping up, and I think that's only going to accelerate. And I mean, if there's any world leaders listening, if you make your jurisdiction attractive for Bitcoin miners, if you have, I think there's a lot of countries in Africa, for example, that they have a lot of renewable energy, they have a lot of cheap energy, it's totally untapped into hydro, just all sorts of resources. And if they make it clear that they're a Bitcoin jurisdiction, they're a Bitcoin-friendly jurisdiction, I think you can get that type of investment. And then the cool thing is, there's kind of a chicken and the egg problem with energy development, where nobody wants to say build the hydro dam because they're not sure if they're going to build if there's enough demand in the community to sell that electricity to. So how do you justify the cost? How do you guarantee that you have an electricity buyer? On the other hand, if you don't have the electricity, nobody moves there, nobody can build manufacturing things there, so you have a chicken and the egg problem. And one of the things that Bitcoin is uniquely good for is it's a first buyer. It's a guaranteed buyer. So you can build a hydro dam and do a contract where Bitcoin miners come in and use that energy for a couple of years when it's super cheap. And then as that electricity is available in the community, you can then build more infrastructure, more people can come in, use electricity. And then if that cost of electricity goes up, then the Bitcoin miners say, okay, we're not needed anymore. It's not in our best interest to stay. They can leave, and then that electricity is there useful for the community, and then they can use Bitcoin miners to whatever percent still makes sense. So I think that Bitcoin mining is a useful bootstrapping technology, and just it needs the combination of more people to know about it and safe rule of law, so that when you do capital intensive, integration, that you can be assured that they're going to be respected.
In her interview, Alden also discusses the increasing popularity and acceptance of Bitcoin in different regions of the world compared to fiat currencies, many of which have been around for decades. Despite the disappointing performance of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies in 2022, more industries and companies, including several luxury brands, have shown more support and acceptance of the crypto and digital assets industry. According to Alden, Bitcoin can be thought of as the global open-source version of the Federal Reserve's Fedwire funds services, with even more advantages than the central bank-operated credit transfer service.
Nearly 200 currencies in the world. And how many currencies are useful medium of exchange outside of their host country? If, Egypt, for example, is a country of 100 million people. If I take some Egyptian pounds and I'm in New Jersey, what do I do with those Egyptian pounds? I don't even know if a bank would take them and convert them. Most banks wouldn't. It'd be very hard to actually find a way to use that to purchase anything or transfer anything outside of Egypt or outside of maybe a couple countries around Egypt. And then you can pick another example like Norway, for example. Norway is a wealthy country. If I had Norwegian currency with me in New Jersey or here in LA, what do I do with that? Right? It's not accepted outside of its enforced monopoly area. I mean, you could eventually find a way, but it's very challenging. Whereas there are some currencies, if you go to most countries in the world and you have dollars, you could find someone to take them off your hands pretty easily. It's not that hard of a process. If you have a gold coin and you go to most countries in the world, so you can eventually find someone to take that off your hand. It's not rocket science to find someone. And we're starting to, over time, Bitcoin is becoming a top 5 or probably top 5, definitely top 10 globally saleable money, which means that if you have Bitcoin, especially in urban centers of the world, reasonably tech-savvy areas, you can find someone to take Bitcoin off your hands a lot easier than you can for many other fiat currencies of the world. I mean, it's out of the 100+ currencies, it's getting up there, and the trend is obviously heading higher. And I think we're kind of seeing the same thing when it comes down to these individual communities that are building up, right? I think those are more powerful than top-down attempted implementations. I think the more people in a community that understand Bitcoin, get educated on it, and then they see it firsthand. I mean, basically, it's like you need a critical mass of merchants accepting it, people wanting to use it, people saving in it, and then you get that circular community, and you go to an underbanked area especially, and they get the benefit right away, and I think it's powerful. So Bitcoin currently settles trillions of dollars worth of value annually, And even when you adjust it for, because, some of the money kind of comes back to, if you have an unspent transaction, it comes back to your own, where you sent it from. You can have that gross number that's, a little bit overstated. Even when you adjust for that, it's still very, very high. It's over $1 trillion and multiple trillions of dollars usually for annual settlement. And it's a huge network. And the interesting thing about it is that if you compare it to Fedwire, which is the biggest settlement, infrastructure we have in the United States, it's basically, the Federal Reserve's interbank settlement system. Bitcoin and Fedwire process approximately the same number of transactions per year. It's kind of funny how that works out. And you can kind of think of Bitcoin as the global open source version of that. And then unlike Fedwire, it has its own gold attached to it, right? So Fedwire is just settling fiat currencies that are then running on top of the Federal Reserve, whereas Bitcoin is basically a Fedwire settlement network with also its own digital gold attached to it. It's a scarce unit that is also, doing that type of thing. And then the funny thing I like to point out is that, Bitcoin has had higher uptime than Fedwire. What was it, 2021 when Fedwire went down for a couple hours, and Bitcoin hasn't had a technical issue since 2013. Really, I mean, it's had some behind the scenes technical issues, but it's never actually had a chain split or some sort of interruption since 2013, and even that was very brief.
It's amazing. It's mind blowing. What are you excited about on the security side?
Like security for Bitcoin, or what I love about kind of the Bitcoin development in general is how security focused it is, right? So if you look at other ecosystems, quote unquote digital assets or crypto, it's kind of like move fast, break things, see what works, and worry about security later. Whereas Bitcoin, it's like everything is slow, deliberate, and security focused, right? And we see that from the core devs, you see it from the applications built around it. And so, I think security is in a good place, and I think it's really about ongoing improvements. I think Lightning still needs more hardening, more security robustness. I think that comes with time and size, and I think that's something we're going to see over time. And I'm also interested in seeing just, they're doing improvements in making nodes have, better bandwidth, lower bandwidth requirements to run. A lot of it, people say that Bitcoin's not innovating. It's mainly innovating to make what it already does well better. It's not trying to add new junky features. It's trying to say, okay, this is already great. How can we incrementally make this great thing even better, slowly and securely over time?
What are your thoughts on Lyn Alden's interview and the increasing popularity of Bitcoin and other crypto assets? Do you think the leading crypto asset will someday replace the US dollar as the world's dominant reserve currency? Please drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.